Things humans once thought were impossible. For most of human history, people lived with limits. Not just physical limits, but mental ones. They believed there were things that simply could never be done. Flying through the sky like birds, running faster than the human body should allow, communicating instantly across the entire planet, even surviving diseases that once wiped out millions. At one point, every one of these ideas sounded impossible, and yet, they happened. So, the real question is this: were these things actually impossible? Or did humans just not know how to do them yet? When the sky was impossible flight, for most of human history, the sky was not something to be conquered. It was something to be watched. People looked up and saw birds moving freely through the air, and the idea of doing the same was both fascinating and unreachable. Flight belonged to nature, not to humans. Gravity was simply accepted as a permanent rule of life. What goes up must come down, and there was no argument against it. Ancient civilizations imagined flying in myths and stories, but these were always treated as fantasy. Gods had wings, heroes rode magical creatures, inventions like flying machines appeared in sketches and legends, but they were never taken seriously as real possibilities. The sky was beautiful, but it was also a boundary. For centuries, inventors tried to challenge that boundary. Some built wings made of wood and cloth, attempting to mimic birds. Others experimented with gliders or early mechanical designs. Most of these attempts ended in failure, and often in danger. Because of this, the idea of human flight was widely seen as unrealistic or even foolish. Many believed the human body was simply not built for the air. By the 19th century, science had advanced enough to study aerodynamics, but even then, powered flight still felt out of reach. Engineers understood lift, drag, and air resistance in theory, but translating those ideas into a working machine remained a massive challenge. The sky still felt like a locked door with no known key. Then, in the early 20th century, everything began to change. A new generation of inventors approached the problem differently. Instead of relying on imagination alone, they experimented methodically, testing designs, learning from failures, and improving step by step. Among them were two bicycle mechanics from Ohio, Orville Wright and Wilbur Wright, who were deeply focused on solving the problem of controlled flight. On December 17, 1903, at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, something happened that quietly reshaped human history. The Wright brothers achieved the first powered, controlled flight in a heavier-than-air machine. It was brief, lasting only seconds, but it was real. For the first time, a machine carrying a human had lifted off the ground under its own power and stayed in the air in a controlled way. What had once been considered impossible was now proven possible. At first, many people were skeptical or unaware of the significance, but within years, progress accelerated rapidly. Aircraft designs improved, engines became more powerful, and flight distances increased. What had taken nature millions of years to perfect in birds, humans were now beginning to replicate through engineering. And then something even more remarkable happened. Flight stopped being extraordinary. Within a single century, the world went from no human flight at all to global air travel. What was once a miracle became routine. Today, millions of people board airplanes every day without a second thought, crossing continents in hours instead of weeks or months. The sky did not change. Human understanding did. What was once impossible was not a fixed truth. It was simply a problem waiting for the right knowledge, tools, and persistence to solve it. The limit of the human body, the 4-minute mile. For much of modern athletic history, running a mile in under 4 minutes was believed to be beyond human capability. It wasn't just considered difficult, it was considered physically impossible. Doctors, coaches, and sports scientists of the early 20th century often agreed that the human body had natural limits. The heart, lungs, and muscles, they argued, could only withstand so much stress. At high speeds, it was widely believed that a runner's body would simply break down before reaching that milestone. Some even suggested that attempting it could be dangerous. Because of this belief, the 4-minute mile became more than a sports challenge. It became a psychological boundary. Athletes trained for it, dreamed about it, and failed repeatedly. Yet each failure seemed to reinforce the same conclusion: the limit was real. By the early 1950s, The world record had been pushed closer and closer to 4 minutes, but never beyond it. Runners came within seconds. 3:59 felt like a wall rather than a number. The idea that a human could run faster than that barrier seemed to contradict what people thought they understood about biology and endurance. And yet, something important was happening in the background. Training methods were improving. Athletes were becoming more scientific in their approach, focusing on pacing, interval training, and recovery. Competition was intensifying across countries. The belief that the record could fall was slowly growing, but still, doubt remained. Then, in 1954, everything changed. A British middle-distance runner named Roger Bannister approached the mile differently. Rather than treating it as an impossible physical limit, he treated it as a problem of strategy, pacing, and controlled effort. On May 6, 1954, at Oxford's Iffley Road track, Bannister ran the mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. For the first time in history, the barrier had been broken. What makes this moment even more remarkable is what happened next. Just weeks later, other runners began to achieve the same feat. Within a few years, many athletes had broken the 4-minute mile. What had once been described as a biological limit suddenly became a standard achievement for elite runners. Nothing about the human body had fundamentally changed in that short time. What changed was belief. The limit had not been a fixed physical boundary. It had been a psychological one. Once someone proved it could be done, the barrier lost its power. The 4-minute mile remains one of the clearest examples in history of how human performance is shaped not only by biology, but by perception. It shows that what is considered impossible is often just what has not yet been achieved. And once it is achieved, it stops being impossible at all. Instant communication across the world. For most of human history, communication was slow, physical, and uncertain. If someone wanted to send a message across a long distance, it had to travel with a person on foot, by horse, by ship, or later by train. That meant delays of days, weeks, or even months. Entire decisions were made without knowing what was happening elsewhere in real time. Wars were fought with outdated information. Families waited long periods just to hear a single reply. Distance did not just separate people, it separated time itself. Early civilizations tried to improve this. Signal fires, flags, drums, and messenger systems allowed information to travel faster than a person could physically carry it alone. But even these methods were limited by geography, weather, and visibility. Communication still depended on human chains, and every chain had weak points. Then came a major shift in the 19th century: electrical communication. The invention of the telegraph changed everything. For the first time, messages could travel through wires using electrical signals, dramatically reducing the time required to send information over long distances. Words that once took weeks could now arrive in minutes. It was a revolutionary step, but it was still not instant communication in the modern sense. It required infrastructure, trained operators, and coded messages. The telephone followed soon after, adding something even more powerful: voice. People could now hear each other across distance, not just read messages. This made communication feel more immediate, more human, and more connected. But even then, it was still limited by physical lines and access to devices. Throughout the 20th century, communication continued to accelerate. Radio waves enabled wireless transmission. Television brought live images into homes. Satellites expanded global coverage. Each innovation reduced the distance between people, but none eliminated it completely. Then the internet arrived. At first, it was a slow and technical system used mainly by researchers and institutions. But, as it expanded, it began to transform how information moved across the world. Email replaced letters. Websites replaced printed directories. Messages could be sent instantly, from one side of the planet to the other, without waiting for physical transport. By the early 21st century, communication had reached a point that earlier generations would have found difficult to imagine. Smartphones combined text, voice, video, and internet access into a single handheld device. Suddenly, a person could speak face-to-face with someone on another continent in real time, as if distance no longer mattered at all. What once required ships, messengers, or physical infrastructure now happens in seconds. But this transformation is not just about speed. It also changed the scale of communication. Instead of one-to-one messages, people now communicate in networks, group chats, social media feeds, video calls with multiple participants, and global broadcasts viewed instantly by millions. Information is no longer just sent. It is shared, amplified, and redistributed continuously. And yet, beneath this instant system, a complex infrastructure still exists. Satellites orbiting Earth, undersea fiber optic cables stretching across oceans, and massive data centers processing billions of messages every second. Communication may feel instant, but it is supported by one of the largest and most sophisticated systems ever built. In the end, instant communication did not eliminate distance, it simply overcame it. What once took months, then days, then minutes, now takes seconds, and like many breakthroughs in human history, it did not just change technology. It changed how people experienced the world itself. Defeating diseases once thought unstoppable. For most of human history, disease was not something people could reliably fight. It was something they endured. Illness often appeared suddenly, spread quickly, and disappeared only after taking countless lives. Entire cities and civilizations were shaped by outbreaks that could not be explained, prevented, or controlled. Without understanding germs, viruses, or bacteria, people often attributed disease to fate, environment, or even punishment. Medicine existed, but it was limited in what it could truly do. In many cases, the most powerful response to disease was isolation, prayer, or hope. Some illnesses became so feared that they shaped history itself. Epidemics could weaken armies, collapse trade routes, and depopulate entire regions. Waves of infection would return again and again, leaving societies permanently changed. In these conditions, disease felt unstoppable not because people didn't care, but because they lacked the tools to stop it. Even as medical knowledge slowly improved, major breakthroughs were rare. Early attempts at treatment were often based on trial and error. Some methods helped slightly, others did nothing, and some were harmful. The idea that invisible organisms cause disease was not widely accepted until relatively recently in history. Then, over time, that understanding began to change. One of the most important shifts came with the development of germ theory, the realization that many diseases are caused by microscopic organisms that spread between people. This single idea transformed medicine. It meant that disease was not random or mystical, but biological, and if something was biological, it could potentially be studied, controlled, and prevented. From that foundation, modern medicine began to grow rapidly. Vaccination became one of the most powerful tools in human history. Instead of waiting for disease to strike, vaccines trained the immune system to recognize and fight specific infections before they could cause serious harm. Over time, diseases that once caused widespread fear and death were dramatically reduced or even eliminated in many parts of the world. Antibiotics added another breakthrough. Bacterial infections that were once life-threatening became treatable. Simple injuries that might have led to fatal infections in the past could now be healed with medication. Surgery became safer. Hospitals became places of recovery rather than last resorts. As science advanced further, medical imaging, sterilization techniques, and improved public health systems transformed how diseases were managed on a global scale. Clean water systems reduced the spread of infection. Hygiene practices became standard in medical environments. Large-scale vaccination programs protected entire populations rather than just individuals. Diseases that once moved through populations, unchecked, now faced organized resistance. However, even in the modern world, the story is not simply one of total victory. Some diseases have been controlled but not eliminated. Others evolve over time, adapting in ways that require constant scientific response. Global travel means that outbreaks can spread quickly, but global cooperation also allows faster detection and treatment than ever before. What makes this story remarkable is not that disease has been completely defeated, but that humanity now has the ability to respond to it in ways that were once unimaginable. In earlier eras, disease was a force of nature that people could only accept. Today, it is a scientific challenge, one that can be studied, predicted, and often controlled. The shift is profound. It marks one of the clearest examples of how human knowledge can transform something once seen as unstoppable into something that, while still serious, is no longer beyond reach. Reaching space and beyond. For most of human history, Earth was the center of everything people could imagine. The sky above was vast and mysterious, but it was also a boundary. Beyond it, there was only speculation. The stars were visible every night, yet completely unreachable. The moon changed shape in the sky, but it remained distant and untouched. Even the idea of leaving Earth itself was treated as mythology rather than possibility. Early civilizations built stories around the heavens. Gods and spirits were placed among the stars. Celestial movements were carefully tracked, but mostly for timekeeping, agriculture, or religious meaning, not exploration. The universe was something to observe, not something to enter. For centuries, the concept of space travel belonged entirely to imagination. Even as science advanced, the gap between Earth and space remained enormous. Early astronomers like Galileo improved understanding of the cosmos, revealing that planets were physical worlds and that Earth was not the center of everything. This shifted humanity's perspective, but it did not yet make travel beyond Earth feel possible. The distances involved were too large, and the technology too limited. Then came the age of rockets. The idea of using controlled explosions to propel objects into the sky was once considered theoretical, or even absurd. But in the 20th century, scientists and engineers began turning rocket theory into real engineering. Gradually, rockets became more powerful, more stable, and more precise. What started as experimental technology became the foundation for reaching beyond Earth. Everything changed in 1957 when the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, was launched into orbit by the Soviet Union. For the first time, a human-made object was no longer bound to Earth. It circled the planet in space, silently proving that leaving Earth was not just a dream, it was achievable. This moment marked the beginning of the space age. Within a few years, humans followed. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first person to travel into space, orbiting Earth and returning safely. Soon after, more missions followed, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Each flight expanded human presence beyond the atmosphere, step by step. Then came one of the most iconic moments in human history, the moon landing. In 1969, Apollo 11 carried astronauts to the surface of the moon. Neil Armstrong's first steps represented more than just a technical achievement. They symbolized a shift in human capability. A world that once thought space was unreachable had now placed footprints on another celestial body. What had been impossible for all of history had become reality within a single generation. But reaching space was only the beginning. After the moon, attention turned outward. Satellites began to surround Earth, enabling global communication, navigation, weather forecasting, and scientific observation. Space was no longer just a destination, it became an infrastructure supporting life on Earth. Robotic missions explored planets, moons, and asteroids. Telescopes were launched into orbit, allowing humanity to see deeper into the universe than ever before. Each discovery expanded understanding of cosmic scale, showing that Earth was just one small part of a much larger system. Today, space exploration continues to evolve. Private companies and national agencies are developing technologies for returning to the moon, traveling to Mars, and exploring farther into the solar system. What once belonged to science fiction is now part of long-term planning. And yet, even with all this progress, space remains one of the most challenging frontiers. The distances are vast, the environment is extreme, and the technology required is still developing. But what has already been proven is more important than the remaining challenges. Humanity can leave Earth. The boundary that once defined existence is no longer absolute. What was once beyond reach has become a place humans have already visited, and may eventually return to, inhabit, and explore even farther beyond. The new impossible becoming ordinary. Across human history, the same cycle appears again and again. Things once dismissed as impossible eventually become part of normal life. This change almost never happens overnight. In the beginning, A new idea seems unrealistic or absurd because it conflicts with what people believe the world allows. Then someone discovers a way to make it work. Early versions are often limited, costly, or experimental. But as time passes, the idea improves, spreads, and becomes widely accepted. Eventually, it feels so ordinary that people forget how unbelievable it once seemed. That process has driven much of human advancement, and we are watching it happen once more today. Not very long ago, the thought of carrying a high-powered computer in your pocket would have sounded impossible. Early computers occupied entire rooms, required enormous resources, and were accessible only to governments, universities, or large organizations. Today, smartphones place extraordinary computing power into the hands of billions of people. Communication, navigation, photography, entertainment, editing, and instant access to information now exist within a single handheld device. What once appeared extraordinary has become routine. Communication follows the same pattern. Real-time video calls across continents, instant translation, and constant global connection once belonged to science fiction. Now they are woven into everyday work, education, and social life. Oceans and borders no longer prevent people from interacting face-to-face. Artificial intelligence is undergoing a similar transformation. Systems that once existed only in theoretical discussions or research labs are becoming practical tools. Used every day, AI can now assist with writing, analysis, image generation, problem solving, and countless creative or professional tasks. What once felt distant is now developing directly in front of us. This progression reaches far beyond digital technology. It appears in transportation, healthcare, and access to knowledge as well. Air travel, once considered a rare engineering marvel, is now an ordinary part of modern society. Medical advances that once seemed unimaginable, organ transplants, robotic surgery, advanced prosthetics have become standard practice in many parts of the world. Information that once required years of study and physical libraries can now be accessed instantly through digital networks. Again and again, the sequence stays the same: skepticism, innovation, adoption, normalization. Perhaps the most fascinating part is the final stage. Once a breakthrough becomes common, people stop recognizing how astonishing it originally was. Human expectations adjust. Yesterday's miracle becomes today's baseline, and that leads to an important question. Which ideas that seem impossible now are already moving through this same cycle? Fully autonomous transportation, dramatically extended lifespans, permanent settlements beyond Earth, or direct integration between human thought and digital systems still sound uncertain or futuristic. Yet earlier generations felt the same way about airplanes, global communication, and space travel. History suggests that the line between impossible and ordinary is never permanent. It keeps shifting forward. The deeper pattern is not that humanity defeats impossibility once it is that humanity continuously redefines what impossibility means. Every generation grows up surrounded by breakthroughs, achieved by those before them, and accepts them as normal. Then that generation pushes further, transforming new barriers into new accomplishments. Ultimately, the story of progress is not only about invention or discovery, it is also about perspective. What once seemed unimaginable becomes achievable. What once seemed achievable becomes routine. And what becomes routine eventually fades into the background until something new appears that feels impossible right up until the moment it no longer does. Closing idea: the pattern behind impossible. When you step back and view these examples together, a larger pattern emerges. Human flight, once believed impossible, became everyday transportation. Running a 4-minute mile, once viewed as beyond human capability, became a benchmark for elite athletes. Instant worldwide communication, once unimaginable, now happens continuously. Diseases that once devastated civilizations can now often be prevented or treated. Even space travel, once humanity's ultimate frontier, has shifted from miracle to ongoing exploration. On the surface, these achievements seem unrelated. They belong to different centuries, disciplines, and challenges. Yet underneath them lies the same repeating structure. At first, Something is labeled impossible not necessarily because it truly cannot happen, but because no one has yet discovered how to achieve it. The idea exists at the edge of imagination, separated from reality by missing knowledge, inadequate tools, or limited understanding. For a long time, that separation feels permanent. Then progress slowly narrows the gap, not instantly, but through experimentation, setbacks, incremental improvements, and occasional breakthroughs. What once seemed unreachable becomes repeatable, then scalable, then ordinary. The barrier itself turns out not to have been absolute, but temporary. This may be one of the deepest lessons of human progress. Many impossibilities are temporary, expressions of limited understanding rather than permanent laws. That does not mean every dream is achievable. Genuine limits do exist: physical, biological, and environmental. But history repeatedly shows that humans are often poor judges of which limits are truly fixed, and which are simply unexplored territory. Again and again, people mistake not possible yet for never possible, and eventually, someone proves them wrong. That is why studying past beliefs about impossibility matters so much. It reveals not only how far humanity has advanced, but how often certainty itself has failed. Ideas once dismissed as fantasy become science. Concepts once confined to theory become ordinary parts of life. And once they become ordinary, they stop feeling extraordinary at all. So, the real question is not only what humanity has already accomplished. It is this: what are we calling impossible today that future generations will consider completely normal?